To begin sewing a flat felt seam, you're going to need 2 pattern pieces with the seam allowance drawn on, and you're going to place them together and pin them just like you would a normal straight stitch. And that's actually the first step, is we're just going to sew this like we would any other straight stitch seam. Remembering to back stitch. I've mentioned it before, but it is really tricky to follow a straight line through a camera. Okay, so now we've got our straight stitch sewn on. We're gonna trim our threads just like always. And now we need to do a little bit of work to make this ready to turn into a flat felled seam. So I'm gonna change my angle so you can see what I'm doing. Now the next step is we've got our seam allowance where they're both the same length, and we need to take one side and cut it down to be a shorter length than the other one. What you want to do is you want to open this up so you make sure you're only grabbing one side. I do kind of finger press it to kind of help make it stay up where I want it to. Or you can kind of open it up and fold it out so you know you only have a hold of one piece. That's actually how I'm going to do that. So that's folded over that way. So you want to trim this down at least to half of the width, or about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. You can totally, if it makes you more comfortable, you can draw in a line from your stitch line that's a 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch from this edge, or you can just eyeball it, which is what I'm gonna do. That's like 3/16 of an inch. I'm gonna cut all the way down, making sure as I'm going that I'm feeling with my bottom fingers. I've got my bottom fingers on my scissors. I know most of the time I've told you to have your scissors flat on the table, but for something like this, I feel like I have better control because I can feel the folded edge that I do not want to cut on my fingers, and I have the bottom edge of the scissors running against my fingers as I cut. So you're only trimming 1/2 of this down to somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. The smaller, the better. Okay, so now we can see if we press this open, one of these seam allowances is significantly shorter than the other. And now we need to, you can also see it if we go this way. Now we need to take this to the ironing board and do some pressing. So what we're gonna do that makes this into a flat felled seam is we're gonna take this longer edge of the seam allowance and fold it over the edge that we cut. Then we'll fold it again so that all of the raw edges are enclosed and we have a really strong seam because we're going to stitch it again. So I'm going to start off by kind of opening this up a bit, pressing all of the seam allowance toward the longer side. This effectively presses my seam open and also makes all of my seam allowances go a direction that makes this a little easier. So now I'm going to take the longer edge and just fold it to, but not over, the stitch line. Just like this. I'm going to press that in place. Going slowly and carefully. Okay. So now it's got a bit of a crisp edge. I want to fold all of this seam allowance this way because I've got a raw edge here and I need that hidden. So I'm going to press this to the other direction and press again. And if you want this to be a really, really clean seam, you can also use a clapper, which is a piece of wood that is unstained. Once you press your seam, you immediately put the wood on top of it and you put a little pressure down and hold it there while the fabric cools. That helps all of this set in place. The wood also soaks some of the heat up and out and helps it cool off a little faster too. All right. I'm gonna give it one more press going this direction from the right side. Get my clapper in a place where I can grab it faster. This fabric really likes to curl and do weird things. Just hold it there for a moment. Okay. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. It's still wanting to fold up a little bit, but that's what pins are for. So I'm going to take my pins and I am going to pin this down so that all of the seam allowance is staying where I want it to. I'll show you a little bit closer in just a moment how all of the raw edges of the fabric are now encased in the seam allowance. Okay, so if we get up in here, so there's the fold edge. All of the raw edges are underneath that fold. Now we can take it back to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew again, this time right next to the edge of the fold, very much like what we did on the lapped seam, and that's gonna create 2 lines of stitching that makes this really strong and sturdy. You actually see this seam on the inside, the inseam of denim jeans most often. So let's take this to the sewing machine. Now we're gonna stitch right next to the folded edge of this seam. Remember to back stitch. Okay, so I'm still sewing with my bobbin and top thread as different colors, so you can see that my bobbin was on this side and then this is my top side. And from here, now we see we've got a seam here and then another row of stitches on this side. So this is a flat felled seam. On the inside of the garment, you see 2 lines of stitches. On the outside of the garment, you see a seam with a row of stitches right next to it.